Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show. I'd just like to take a moment to tell you about a book that I've written. It's a memoir called Fool Me Twice, and it's a story about my life with a focus on my journey internet dating, where I was scammed and injured in the process. It's an educational book that will help many other people not to get caught in the same trap that I was. I'd like to also take this opportunity to play my book promo for you. Here it is.
From life on a farm in rural Australia, where wide open spaces made a young woman yearn to know what was beyond her country town. She moved to the city, became a mother, and found her dream career which took her across the world. But still, something was missing. In her search for love, she traveled far, trusted deeply. She wanted so badly to find someone that she almost lost herself in the process, and learned some hard lessons along the way. Fool Me Twice, a new memoir by Jules Hannaford. Available August 20th on Amazon.
A warning to our listeners, some of the topics discussed in this podcast may be disturbing. If you need support, please contact your local crisis line or helpline, and if you're in Hong Kong and you'd like to call the Samaritans hotline, you can call them on 2896 0000. Today I'm here with Sofie Jacobs. Thank you so much for coming to meet me today, Sofie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's very exciting to have you here. Sofie, tell me a bit about your work as a midwife.
I am a midwife, and this is actually my 20th year. I did freak out a little bit the other day because I realized that I'm getting older, and I've been doing this for 20 years. Now, how I currently work as a midwife is very different from what I did when I first qualified. In 98, when I qualified in Belgium, I went straight into full-on clinical work in the UK, actually in London. So I went from being a student and throwing myself into the deep end of clinical midwifery, delivering babies, about 2 or 3 in a shift. And it was really full on. And I now, 20 years later, focus more on the emotional side of things. So I do a lot more coaching and counseling and childbirth education because I feel that that is really, really important.
Oh, how cool. So where do you work?
I work for myself. So I have a company called Urban Hatch, and that's where I focus on providing support and guidance for women and men throughout pregnancy, birth, and the first few months of parenthood, essentially.
Home birth is not legal in Hong Kong, is it?
Oh, that's a myth, actually. It is legal.
Oh, it is?
But at the moment, there's just no one doing it. So we used to have a midwife in Hong Kong who did still home births, and she doesn't do them anymore. So there's just no one available.
Do you do home birth?
I would never do it in Hong Kong.
Right.
I'm a big supporter of home births in the right country and in the right place. You need to be supported by the local hospital. And in Hong Kong, there is very little support. I don't know whether you've ever noticed as well that ambulances just don't get priority when there's traffic. People just sit there and the ambulance has to wait until the traffic starts moving.
Yes, I have noticed that.
It's so in a home birth situation, when you do need the support, when you do need the backup of an ambulance, you want to make sure that the ambulance can move through traffic and that you're going to be well received by the local hospital.
That's the bottom line of why you don't do it.
It's not supported here.
Because the traffic in Hong Kong is ridiculous sometimes, and when it rains, it's even more ridiculous.
Yes,
so
exactly.
it could take you an hour to get a very short distance.
Yeah, and you know what? When it's a life and death situation, you don't want that.
Yeah.
And in London, I did plenty of home births because it's part of the public health system. And midwives who do home births are actually part of the whole National Health Service. So as much as home births in the UK are declining, they're still possible.
Right, but it's not possible here. How does working in Hong Kong compare to working in the UK?
Oh, it's very different. If I were to work as a hospital midwife here, I would have the choice to go either private, which would be the likelihood because I don't speak Cantonese, and working as a midwife in the private sector here, gosh, I would find it very frustrating, to be honest, Jules, because I wouldn't have that much authority and I would basically be the assistant of the obstetrician who's looking after the couple in question. Very similar to Belgium, actually. Belgium, we have midwives, but we're more obstetric nurses in Belgium than actual independently practicing midwives.
Ah, does that mean you haven't worked in a hospital at all in Hong Kong?
I haven't, no. Well, I do as a private midwife. So I have clients who hire me to go with them and be their private midwife, but I'm not allowed to do any clinical work then. So I'm not allowed to actually deliver the baby. So I'll be there for emotional support.
Do you consider yourself similar to a doula?
No, I am a midwife.
What is the difference between a midwife and a doula?
So the difference between a midwife and a doula is that a midwife is medically trained to follow up pregnancies, to pick up complications and to refer to doctors. We are medically trained to deliver babies and to do the follow-up afterwards in the postnatal period. And doulas are sometimes trained, sometimes they're not trained, but they're there to provide the emotional support.
Right, I understand. How interesting. What are some of the key tips you would give to a woman going through pregnancy?
That's a good question. So the first thing I would say, and then the first thing I do say to every single client that I have is that women have been pregnant ever since we've existed. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that everyone has got their own story prior to becoming pregnant, and everyone will have their own individual story past that pregnancy. That is the first thing. And then the second tip that I always tell my clients is to empower themselves with knowledge, enough, but not too much. And I think the tricky thing since the internet came about is that so many women now ask Dr. Google when they're feeling something that may be out of the ordinary, or, what can I eat? What can I not eat? So they're being bombarded with information that 80% of the time is bullshit.
Yeah, you can say that.
I can say
you
that.
You can say bullshit. Yes, it's so interesting. I had a baby nearly 30 years ago. And when I had my baby, there was no internet. There was nothing you could turn to except that Dr. What's his name, the toddler taming guy. Do you know the guy that wrote Toddler Taming? His book.
Yeah.
And then I also had Ina May Gaskin's Spiritual Midwifery, which was amazing. And then my friends who had already had babies. And that was it,
Yes. And that's what it was like when I first started practicing, because there was we had Ask Jeeves. I think back then I started practicing when there was no internet. There was internet, but it wasn't used in the same way as it is today. And in a way, women were more relaxed about things.
Would you say that the overdoing the research and then really, really looking into stuff in great depth on Google can cause anxiety and stress?
Definitely. Instead of toning the anxiety down, for most people, it's going to increase it.
I can understand that. And you'd be getting a whole bunch of mixed messages as well. You look in one site, you'd find one bit of information. You look in another one, and so many sites are not registered, or there's no real fact behind it or sources. So you just don't know what's real and what's not, do you?
No, and then what happens is, and there's this internal dialogue that goes on into the woman's head, thinking about, okay, what is right, what is wrong, and that causes anxiety. And then their own instinct and their own reason actually gets obliterated a little bit.
Yes, of course, because that's a really good point. We've all got this instinct for motherhood and birthing, haven't we? Well, most people would have that instinct. And if you trust that instinct and you tap into it, you really can get through it with very little information. That's what they used to do back in the old days, didn't they? Back in Ina May Gaskin's time, they would just rely on the community and their instincts.
So true.
So your key bit of information for pregnant women would be not to over-research and don't get overly paranoid and just to more go with the flow and enjoy the pregnancy rather than every time there's a little twinge going, oh my God, what's that? Let's research.
Yeah, to try to enjoy the pregnancy, but also on the flip side, if you're not enjoying the pregnancy, to try not to negate that feeling and force yourself to enjoy it. And I think that's really important as well, because there is such huge amount of pressure the moment that someone pees on a stick and finds out that they're pregnant. Society just expects that person to be, yay, I'm pregnant and I'm, overjoyed. But very often that's not the case. So it's also important that women allow themselves to feel what they're feeling. And if they're getting up one morning and they're feeling like shit and they don't know whether they actually want to be pregnant in that moment in time, that's a feeling that's valid. And that's not to be pushed aside.
Absolutely. And also there's massive hormonal surges and hormonal changes that come with pregnancy. So that can cause mood swings or depression or anxiety or any of that stuff. Having that just boundless joy for being pregnant is not always easy, is it?
It's not. My gosh, hormones are so powerful. What we understand today about hormones that come into the equation when someone is pregnant, when someone is in labor, when someone is giving birth, and when someone is in that postpartum period, we're not even scratching the surface.
And how much do you think hormones play in the role of mental health of women?
Massively. And I'm very passionate about that because I always get really, really angry when women are being labeled to be unmanageable or irrational, crazy sometimes. And most of the time, our mood swings are caused by hormones. Not many women know that when you give birth, within 24 hours after giving birth, our estrogen levels and our progesterone levels plummet to perimenopausal levels.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So that's why on day 4, everybody cries and feels very stressed and upset.
Exactly. And then women tend to start to feel a little bit better, but it's going to go up and down. And that is the estrogen and the progesterone that is out of balance. Because during the pregnancy, estrogen and progesterone massively increases. And then after birth, they crash and progesterone will crash faster than estrogen.
Oh.
And that is where the mood swings come from.
And that irregularity with the hormones can last up to 9 months after the baby's born, can't
months.
it? And breastfeeding causes more hormonal imbalance, doesn't it?
Yes, breastfeeding does prolong that hormonal imbalance. Now, luckily, there's a few things that women can do to help not negate that imbalance, but to help balance things out a little bit. And nutrition is one thing. Rest is another thing. Movement and exercise is another thing. But we have to be real. Someone who's just had a baby, their own priorities in terms of looking after their own health is not going to be on the top of the list.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? They put their baby first.
I mean, and who has time to get up in the morning when they've had a new baby to make a smoothie that's got fresh spinach, soaked chia seeds, a little bit of almond milk, preferably homemade? No one has time for that.
No, I didn't even have time to get out of my pajamas until 4 o'clock in the afternoon some days. Like, it took me that long to be able to get into the shower, get changed and get my clothes on for the day.
Yeah.
So it can be very hard.
Eat, right?
Well, I never forget to eat. I wish I could forget to eat. But yeah, some people forget to eat. They forget to really take care of themselves. You can feel very disheveled and stressed when you've got a new baby.
Yeah.
It can be really tough.
It's hard. So my job is to guide women through that phase, essentially.
That really leads me onto the question of, have you had any experience with women with postpartum depression?
Yes.
Tell me a bit about that. What does that look like?
So postnatal depression or postpartum depression is very common. It's common for women and it's common for men as well. But we'll focus.
Oh, okay. You can tell me about that as well.
On the women
That's
first.
because they've lost their freedom. Sorry.
So maternal postnatal depression, the numbers are quite staggering. I mean, we now know from the latest statistics that 1 in 4 women, that's 25 out of 100, and I have to do the math from my own head,
Yeah.
become postnatally depressed.
It's
to a
that
certain degree.
high.
And let's not forget, I really believe that number is not even the reality because so many cases happen unreported.
Exactly, because people are too busy or stressed, or they think that it's just normal the way they're feeling, or they put their baby first, not themselves, so they don't get help or support that's out there available for them.
Or they're feeling ashamed.
Yes, they
They're
feel
feeling
ashamed. Like
There's still a massive taboo around mental health.
there is, and it can make people feel like they're inadequate as a mother of a newborn baby if they have to admit or face the fact that they're struggling with depression.
Yeah, and feeling inadequate is one of the symptoms of postnatal depression. Loss of appetite is a big one. Not wanting to get out of bed, not looking after yourself, not washing your hair for many days. And I'm not just talking 2 or 3 days, but a whole week, not wanting to interact with anyone and, being tearful and irritable. Now, a lot of these symptoms we do see around the baby blues time, which is around about 3 to 4 days after vaginal birth, 5 to 7 days after a cesarean section. That's what we just talked about when that estrogen and that progesterone hits rock bottom. And this leads me on to the next thing, is postnatal depression is actually very much linked to hormonal imbalances. And that is now coming out in the latest research.
One of the traits that you didn't mention was not feeling bonded with your baby. That can be one as well, can't it?
Can be one as well.
Yeah.
That can also be a symptom of having had a traumatic birth experience and not having processed that.
There's so many factors, aren't there?
Yeah.
There's even more that we haven't thought of. But tell me some of the ways that people can treat postnatal depression. What would you recommend for somebody who has had a baby, is feeling out of sorts, not themselves? What should they do?
The first thing they should do is talk to their partner, if there is a partner around. If there is no partner, then talk to a trusted family member or a friend. And then the next step would be to talk to the family doctor or the obstetrician or midwife, depending on who their primary caregiver is at that moment in time, or go directly to a counselor. But it's important that someone professional assesses the situation and grades the degree of postnatal depression there is, if there is any. And then treatment, if treatment is recommended, it's usually a combination of talk therapy, sometimes psychotherapy, sometimes cognitive behavioral therapy. And then if there is a need to use some medication, that can be prescribed as well. Now, on a more holistic level, because this is what doctors would recommend, and for me as a midwife, I think that, again, pulling in nutrition and pulling in movement as supporting treatments is very important.
Have you been on the ground as somebody that's been the first person to recognise that perhaps somebody has postnatal depression? And how do you approach that with a new mother who you feel might be going through that?
I talk to her about it, very open and honest. And there's usually a barrier that needs to be broken down because of the fact that women, when they give birth, they expect themselves to feel very happy and overjoyed. And when they're not feeling that, they pull up a barrier and try to fake it. That's what usually initially happens. And then after a while, because that's not sustainable, that barrier comes down in the comfort of their own house. But when they're interacting with people, it still might come up. And very often when I do home visits, I'll sit with my client on the sofa and I can see that whatever is going on there is not what's going on inside. And then I try to break down that barrier and then talk to her about it. How is she feeling? Where is that coming from? And then make a plan.
Do you find that when you approach a woman and say, I'm concerned that you may have some postnatal depression, perhaps you should get some help, are they often like, no, I'm not having that, and in denial? Or are they often very relieved that someone recognises what they're going through and they're quite open to the help and support and they feel not alone?
Very relieved. Usually what happens is when I have the conversation, the tears start flowing, and they can flow for 10, 15 minutes sometimes, depending on how much built up there is. And I've only had a handful of cases in all of those 20 years of practice where I've had women who were in complete denial.
Right. And what do you do in that situation? Just keep talking to them over time?
Yeah, get the partner involved and almost force them to go and get professional help.
What can be the consequences if people don't get help for that? How long can it last?
Postnatal depression can last for years if it's left untreated. It can last for years. It's only after a number of years that women who have been postnatally depressed when it was never picked up or it was never treated will turn back and say, I was depressed. And that depression started when I had my first or second or third child.
And that's another point. If you get through your first or second with postnatal depression, it doesn't mean you may not have it with your third. It can happen at any time, can't it?
It can happen at any time, yeah.
What can husbands or partners do to recognise that their partner might be struggling, or how can they recognise that their partner might be struggling?
They can keep an eye out for the signs. So loss of appetite, lack of a bond with the new baby, the woman not looking after herself, not wanting to interact with anyone, not wanting to go out, not wanting to socialize, not looking after herself, and feeling very inadequate in her skills as a mother. Those are generally the symptoms that I tell my male clients to look out for.
Tell me about male postpartum depression. What's that?
It's not a new thing. It's now newly recognized. Paternal postnatal depression is very common. We don't have exact statistics on it yet, but there's more conversation around it, so hopefully statistics will come. I would say that from what I see, probably around about 40% of men experience some degree of postnatal paternal depression. Paternal depression is slightly different from maternal depression in the sense that it's not so much triggered by hormonal changes, but rather triggered by a disorientation, loss of who they are, loss of freedom, but not just that, anxiety around financial matters, feeling pushed in the corner, not getting the attention that they're used to getting. And it's just that complete disorientation and having their world shaken up by that little thing that's come into the family.
And in a way, women have 9 months to get used to it because the baby is growing inside of them and they're having all of the hormonal changes throughout. But the husband is just sort of pottering along on the side. And so they don't have that bond or that connection necessarily as the baby's growing. And then when it's born, it can be such a shock to their system because their life changes forever, doesn't it? It'll never be the same again once you have a child.
Yeah, it's never the same. And it cannot be the same. And we don't want it to be the same. But like you said, women have 9 months or thereabout to get prepared for that journey, and they go through their ups and downs. And for men, that journey of adjustment starts when the baby arrives.
So interesting. Can you think of some of the main concerns that expectant mothers have during their pregnancy?
So the questions that I often get, especially in the early stages of the pregnancy, is what can I eat? What can I not eat? What kind of exercise can I do? How do I protect my growing baby in the best possible way? So during the pregnancy, it's all about what they can do to ensure a healthy growing baby.
And then I imagine towards the end of the pregnancy, the questions are about labour and birth and perhaps motherhood as well.
You know what? That's very interesting, Jules, because you would think that the questions are going to be around motherhood. And in a sense, they are, but on a very practical level. Women actually don't think that much about the emotional upheaval that they're going to, have to prepare for. Labor and birth are obviously big ones. And it's an interesting one because labor and birth is something that you can prepare for, but you cannot plan it. And I am a midwife, but for me, birth plans need to be bent.
Yes, flexible.
And women need to start thinking about birth preferences. But don't call it a birth plan because you're going to set yourself up for complete failure.
And I think that's something that people have got to remember is that any birth is a success, whether it is completely natural, whether there are drugs, whether it's cesarean, whatever, it's all an achievement. And do you think that some women feel like they failed if they don't have the natural birth they're hoping for?
Oh my gosh, most, and what I work with all my clients around is the fact that, the only guarantee that you get from a freaking birth plan is giving birth. That's the only guarantee that you're going to get. So let's forget about the birth plan. And then the second thing is, instead of working towards the perfect birth, let's work towards a positive experience. And that is one where essentially the outcome is a healthy baby and a healthy mother, and a process where she, and if there is a partner, her partner feels supported. And that's a positive birth experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And I think so many people put expectations on themselves, whether it be about the pregnancy, whether it be about their weight gain in pregnancy, whether it be about the type of birth they have, even the type of parenting they do. We're also worried about judgment of others, aren't we?
Yes. There is no sisterhood in motherhood anymore.
Tell me more about that.
There's no sisterhood in motherhood anymore.
What do you mean? People judging each other?
Oh my gosh. Now, in our demographic, there is very little sisterhood in motherhood. And it's almost as if pregnancy and giving birth and being a mom has become a competition. And what person A does is not going to be the same as what person B does. And there is a little bit of judgment very often. For example, when you've given birth and you go back to work, you're going to get a lot of judgment from women that don't go back to work. Is she going to be able to parent properly? Is she going to be able to be there to feed her baby? Is she going to be able to give the bath? If you stay at home as a mom, you're going to get some judgment from some working moms. Oh, she's lost her own identity, blah, 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 blah. When it comes to giving birth, women who give birth without any pain relief, so a truly physiological, natural birth, sometimes judge women who choose to have a cesarean section and vice versa. And it's so sad.
It's really sad. And do you think that this judgment is stronger here in Hong Kong, or do you think that is kind of something that's global?
I think it's something that is global. Again, in our demographics of women, where women tend to be a little bit older the first time they get pregnant. And you wouldn't see this in working class communities.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And
it's almost like the more money people have, the more judgment there is.
Because it gives them perhaps a sense of privilege and a sense of superiority.
Or maybe the other way around. Maybe it's a feeling of lack of confidence.
Maybe. The judgment comes from lack of confidence?
I think judgment very often comes from a lack of confidence in your own choice.
Interesting. That does really make sense, because people who are secure and self-confident and humble, then they don't judge about anyone else. Yeah, exactly. So that's very interesting. So that really brings me, I guess, to talking about self-judgment. And one of the things that many pregnant women struggle with is their body image and this pressure to get their body back after having the baby. Have you had any experience with that?
Yes, lots. And the first thing that we need to remember is that there's no such thing as getting your body back.
No, it's going to be different, isn't it?
It's going to be different. I think women, we always struggle with body image, don't we? And our bodies today are not going to be the same as they will be tomorrow, and they're not the same as they were yesterday. And we go through so many stages. Puberty, first one, we get breasts, our period comes, we get hormonal, we have no freaking idea what to do with ourselves. So we need to get settled, we need to find our groove. Then many of us go through pregnancy, give birth, and then have to deal with postpartum. That's another massive hormonal and emotional upheaval. And again, we then need to transition into our new self and find that new groove. And that is something that takes time, and it takes time and it takes effort. So there's no such thing as getting your pre-pregnancy body back. And I get so mad and angry when I see advertising for exercise programs or nutritional supplements, whatever, that say bounce back after birth.
And there's so many magazine articles about all these stars that get their bodies back. And it's just like, first of all, they've got dietitians, nutritionists, chefs, personal trainers, and then probably not doing anything at all. They don't have to go back to work, and they could totally focus on getting themselves back into shape. Secondly, then Photoshop, the images that we're seeing are not real anyway. And thirdly, they're not happy.
Yeah, well, I think some of them are happy. And I think when it comes to postnatal bodies, social media, it's very polarized at the moment because there is the getting your body back as quickly as possible. And there are the images of women 8 weeks postpartum with a flat stomach. But on the other side, there is the positive body image related to postnatal bodies. And that can be extreme as well because, we get shown bodies of women that are maybe 9 months, 12 months postpartum, stretch marks, everything else, which is absolutely fine, but they're very polarized. It's almost either black or white. And we've forgotten that there's a lot in the middle there. What about
the grey
norm?
area?
What about the grey area? So that makes me very sad.
Do you think it's more self-judgment that forces people to try and do this, make these changes, or do you think it's judgment from others, or both?
I think it's both. I think it's self-judgment is always the one that's going to tip things over, right? Because ultimately you're the one in charge and you're the one making decisions. And again, I think self-judgment, women who have the means and choose to get back in shape as quickly as possible after birth, they're going to be judging themselves to a certain degree. But at the same time, women who don't have the means or choose not to do anything with their postnatal body and ride that wave, that's a certain amount of self-judgment as well, right?
How do you think women can come to terms with their postnatal bodies and allow the process to unfold?
Well, I think allowing the process to unfold is going to work for some women, but it's not going to work for everybody. So I think it's very important that a woman finds herself in her own body and doesn't compare herself to what her friend is doing or what some celebrity is doing or what someone else in social media is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And really that's a message for people everywhere about not comparing. And certainly we see it a lot in teenagers and it can cause a lot of stress, can't it?
And I have to give you an example. I have clients who start exercising when they get the, you're good to go kind of tick box from their doctor or from me as their midwife. 6 weeks postpartum, they'll start with a pretty intense exercise program. And I think that's absolutely fine, if you have the means and you have the time and you have the support. But I also work with women who choose to wait or maybe not get back into exercise. And if that works for them, then that works for them.
It's really about finding the program that's right for you and doing it because it's what you want for your well-being and it's your choice.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. How would you advise a woman to prepare for actual giving birth?
That's a really good question. So I usually work with my clients on 3 levels. And so I kind of take a holistic approach. And I know the word holistic, honestly, every time I say it, it all makes me want to throw up a little bit. It just kind of, I kind of see myself, a candle always in the background, and that's not who I am. But when I say holistic, I mean body, mind, and soul. So we need to prepare the body, we need to prepare the mind, and we need to prepare the soul. Now, how do we prepare the body? So a body to be able to give birth in an optimal way, and by optimal, I don't necessarily mean natural. It could be for that person a cesarean section. We need to have a body that is strong and resilient and flexible to a certain extent as well. So we'll do lots of work on that. So that kind of pulls in movement, it pulls in exercise, it also pulls in nutrition. Preparation of the mind. I give my clients enough knowledge to give them that power that knowledge can give, but not enough to make them more anxious than they already are. I practice mindfulness with them because that is really important to learn to be in the moment, because as we just earlier said, labor and birth, you cannot plan them. So you have to be flexible. Your mind needs to be flexible. And then when it comes to preparing the soul, that is thinking about transitioning into motherhood, getting women prepared for that transition. And that's a really important one.
Yeah, talk to me a bit more about how you do that. How do you prepare a woman for motherhood?
Yeah, well, it's not easy because there is no kind of golden formula and we don't know what journey she's going to go through when she's laboring, when she's birthing her baby. The soul preparation really in the pregnancy comes down to me talking to her about making sure that she's got the right support at home and in her circle of friends. So it's all about doing a little bit of a self-audit. You cut out the crap. You cut out the people that drain you from energy and make you feel like shit. And you surround yourself with people that give you energy and with people that see you for who you are, not wanting to see who they want to see.
Yeah, and that's a really good lesson for life, not just for birth, not just for having a baby or motherhood, but it's a real lesson for life, isn't it? To surround yourself with positive people and people that bring something to the table and make a difference in your life. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's really cool.
Exactly. And then loving yourself, I mean,
that's so important, isn't it?
I think one of the first rule of if you're entering that parenting zone, and that's for women as well as men, is start to learn to love yourself, because only then you'll be able to love your child.
That's true, isn't it? What actual role can the father play during labour?
I love that question because it's such a hot topic right now. We're in 2018, and if we think back historically, it wasn't really until the 70s that men were even allowed to be present during labor and birth in some countries. And we fast forward to now, and now we don't only accept men in the labor room, but we actually expect them to be there. And we don't just expect them to be there, but we also expect them to do the right thing and say the right thing.
Yeah, they've got to be active participants, don't they?
Exactly the right time. We want them to cut the umbilical cord. We want them to massage the back. And we want them to say encouraging words. And we want them to do all of that without giving them the freaking tools.
Yeah,
to help
there's
them
no
prepare
training,
for
is
that.
there?
Oh my gosh. I actually created an online childbirth education course. And within that course, I spent quite a lot of time on preparing
the fathers.
The partners.
Cool.
Yeah.
Or the partners, because hang on, yes, let's be gender neutral.
For female partners, it tends to be a little bit easier than male partners.
Is that because the female partners can kind of connect with what's going on a little bit more?
Venus.
Yeah, that's
it's
really
nothing
cool.
more complicated than that. Men are fixers and women are facilitators. So in labor, my gosh, the role, that identity, that kind of intrinsic soul of a male is going to be taken apart because he can't fix things. First of all, in an uncomplicated labor and birth, there's nothing to fix, but it will appear so to him because he is going to see his partner in a state he's never seen her in before. She is going to make certain sounds, it's going to become very primal. And he's going to be like, what the fuck? What can I do? I need to fix this. I need to fix this.
And they feel a bit powerless, don't they? Because there's nothing much that they can do to change what's going on. They can only just be there and offer support.
They can only be there. And that is the kind of the thing that I say in my online antenatal course is, if there's one thing that you can do, is be there. Lower the bar and you're going to feel a lot better about it. Now, if that labor ends up being complicated, then that obviously adds an extra layer of stress because he can see that his partner is in distress. There's questions about, my gosh, is our baby going to make it? So he's going to want to fix things even more. And he's going to have to hand over that fixing role to the midwife and to the doctor in charge. And that makes a man feel stripped away from what he's meant to be doing. It's not pretty.
Right, so it demasculates him a bit. Right, interesting. What can we do to help overcome that? I think preparation beforehand, yeah?
Preparation, and what I always have very open and honest conversations with my clients and say, look, when it comes to choosing your birthing partner, it doesn't have to be your life partner. Have an open conversation about what you as a woman expect your labor partner to do, and then see how he reacts to that. Is he open to that, or does it freak him out? Because quite honestly, if it freaks him out, why not pay someone, a doula or a private midwife, to take over that primary role of providing support and let him be the secondary support?
That's good advice, isn't it?
He can be there, but take that pressure away.
Have you seen that happen where then it's more harmonious?
Yes. And I do a little bit less labor support now because I just don't have that much time anymore. But I used to do a lot of, private midwifery work where I would get hired to be that primary labor support and stay with my client at home for as long as possible do all the necessary medical checks and provide that support as well. And the partner would be there, on the periphery, but still be there. And it's still a very important role.
And because you're taking the pressure off them, then they can be a little bit more chilled and relaxed, and that can mean they can be more supportive, They can bond with the baby.
Yeah. He relaxes, she relaxes, her body relaxes, and labor and birth just tend to go a lot more
everything goes more smoothly. What about parenting afterwards? Do you think it can even help them move into the parenting world a little bit more smoothly?
Definitely, because if there is a traumatic experience and traumatic birth experience, it's not only our thing. Males can experience a traumatic birth. And if it's not talked about, that can seep through into that postnatal period.
How long might you typically work with a couple after the baby has been born?
I kind of cut the umbilical cord.
Yeah, I love that metaphor.
Sweet.
That's beautiful.
I just came up with that. I might use that again.
Yeah.
9 months.
All right. So you can stay with them for that long?
9 months. Now, most of my clients need me until around about 4, 5, 6 months.
Okay, wow.
But I do work with some until 9 months. So my midwifery role, it becomes an extended role.
Oh, so you're a little bit like a super nanny as well. So do you come in and sort of help with the...
And I come in my London taxi.
Excellent. Do you help them with their parenting skills and all of that as well?
Yes, I do. And so sleep consultations, I do quite a lot of those, helping parents transition back into work if that's what they want to do, get the baby onto a bit of a schedule, which is not always easy, because babies, they're their own little ecosystem and it constantly evolves and it constantly changes. And you must have gone through this 30 years ago. You think that you've got the hang of things one day, and then the next day it all seems to go to shit.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You think, what the hell have I done wrong? But you're not doing anything wrong. It's your baby that changes. So I do a lot of postnatal coaching, essentially.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize you were so involved for so long. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, when I first started as a private midwife, I limited my care to 28 days after birth. But then I would get phone calls from clients asking me to do more and more and more. So I just kind of said, yes, I'll do more and more and more.
Oh, cool. And do you work with people but not necessarily be in the labour, or do the only people you work with you are actually a part of the labour?
No, I very often see them through the pregnancy and then either labour on their own or with a doula or with one of my private midwife colleagues. So there's a lot of things that I can do with my clients.
And they might even go off and just have the baby at the hospital.
Yes. Or I'll start seeing clients after they've given birth.
Oh, right.
That sometimes happens as well.
Oh, so you're super flexible about how people can work with you. That's awesome.
Flexible.
Can you share a memorable birthing story with us? I suppose there's so many experiences and birth is such a wonderful thing, but is there anything that stands out as exciting or crazy or weird or funny?
I actually could talk about this all night.
I'm sure, after doing it for 20 years.
I'll have to tell you about 2 though.
Okay, cool.
Talk about just one. So the first baby I delivered completely on my own, without any supervision, without anyone with me other than the woman and her partner. I will never forget that because I almost shat my pants.
You were so scared,
so
were
nervous.
you?
I was 21 and I had just arrived in London.
So young.
I was so young.
Why were you on your own?
Because I was a qualified midwife.
Because in the UK, it's very typical that the babies are just born with a midwife.
Exactly.
Forget the doctor. You
That's
don't need
how it's
one.
done in the National Health
Yes,
Service.
I knew
You're
that.
being looked after by the midwife. And if a doctor comes into the room, you know that there is something not right.
Right. Whereas in
But
many
there
other
I was.
cultures, the doctor's there and...
Yes.
I had a home birth with a midwife at home, and the doctor came after my daughter was born and had been out drinking, I think.
Yeah. But
yeah, this is great.
I will never forget because I was so nervous, but I couldn't show my nerves, right? Because I was like, okay, first time parents, they've never done this before. I've never done this before. I mean, I have under supervision, but not completely on my own. So I walked in and I said, hi. My name is Sofie and I'm going to deliver your baby. And the couple, they literally looked at each other and I could see them thinking, what the hell? And they did ask, how old are you? And I said, I'm 21, but that does not matter. I've delivered plenty of babies and I know exactly what to do.
Good for you. And That give them
And that
confidence
gave
in
them
you?
confidence.
Great.
And it was the most beautiful labor and the most beautiful birth. And all I could think when this baby came out was, don't drop
it.
the baby. I forgot to look at the clock.
Yeah.
So the timing, 5 minutes, more or less, I don't know. But that's the only thing I forgot to do. The
That's
rest was
great.
all-
Oh,
yeah,
that's
it was
okay.
Beautiful,
Oh,
beautiful,
wow.
beautiful.
Oh,
So I'll
my
never
gosh.
forget that. Another birth experience that really is still with me after all that time is, again, I was in one of the national health hospitals. I looked after a Somali woman who was a refugee, and she was in labor. Now, she had been a victim of a severe genital mutilation. Her husband was with her. She wasn't allowed to have an epidural. And I still get a little bit emotional about it, thinking back. So, a radical female circumcision means that literally there is no clitoris, there are no labia, and all the woman is left with is a teeny tiny opening. And when you see that, you actually wonder, how did that penis even get in here? It's so small. So she had to have a double episiotomy, one up
and down.
and one down. And that was done without epidural analgesia because she wasn't allowed.
Oh my gosh.
And I have never seen a woman with such mental and physical strength ever since.
Wow. So she coped with it.
She coped with it. All I could think when I looked after her was, I wondered what she had been through before this.
To be able to have that
to be
strength.
able to have that strength, she must have gone through hell and back numerous times.
That's so powerful.
So powerful. And I still think about her very regularly. And yeah, so that's one of these birth stories that will always stay with me. And it wasn't a happy one, because ultimately, as midwives, most of the time we are surrounded by joy and happiness, but sometimes we're not.
And that was one of those times.
And that was one of those times.
And you've got to put on your brave
But you
face
have to
and
put on
give
your
her
brave face.
strength.
Yeah.
And she was obviously very brave. And I think that's just tragic. And female genital mutilation should be banned worldwide. Yeah,
should be banned. And I mean, the worst thing is that it's actually passed on from female to female.
I know.
I mean, that's another thing I could talk about for hours.
I know, it's terrible. But I think, slowly the message is starting to get across to the cultures that do it, but it's not getting across fast enough.
It's not getting across fast enough.
And it's still happening even in Western cultures where people, it's part of their tradition. They're still doing it in the UK where it's illegal.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a real shame, isn't it? Oh, it's sad. It's terribly sad. Run away. Oh, they're so young though when it happens.
Yes,
they can't. It's
they
terrible. Yeah. Moving on from that, that's very sad.
I know.
Thank you for
Is it okay to keep that in? Yeah. It is, right? Because I also feel we need to go a little bit lighter because I'm like,
this is Hong Kong Confidential. We go deep, and we're not afraid of issues that many people don't want to talk about or don't want to hear about. I just have to put a warning in the write-up so that people know. But it's important to get the message out there that people know that it is still happening and that there are many causes in the world that need people to be activists, and that's one of them. Find what you're passionate about and get on board and be an activist, whether it's LGBTQ rights or transgender rights or female genital mutilation or the environment or, there's so many issues in the world that need to be addressed, and that's one of them. And it's at the core of many women in many cultures and children. So sad. Oh, I hope we're making a difference. Maybe somebody out there will listen and we're making a difference for one family or one person or whatever. So that's good. Do you think every woman should breastfeed her baby?
No, I don't think everyone should try to breastfeed her baby. And I'll elaborate on that.
Thank you.
So we can't argue with the fact that breast milk is the most natural form of nutrition for a baby. That is a fact, and we cannot argue with that. But it's not always the best option. It's only going to be the best option if it works for the mother on a physical level, on a practical level, and on an emotional level. And it obviously needs to work for the baby as well. And if it doesn't work, then she needs to know that there are other safe alternative options out there. And I'm talking in our demographics, we've got access to clean water. We've got access to good quality formula milk. I'm not saying that in places where there is no access to clean water, then the only option is really going to be breast milk, because we know that it's not sterile, but that it's going to be of good quality, so to speak. But in our demographics, there are options out there. There are other options that are safe.
And I think breastfeeding's hard. For many people, it's hard to get the baby to latch on. They're stressful. And not everybody can do it. And once again, people who aren't successful shouldn't judge themselves and feel like they're a failure as a mother. And that can happen, can't it?
That happens. I think when it comes to breastfeeding, there's a lot more judgment around actually baby feeding than there is around types of birth.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay, so you feel like people get judged
Definitely.
More for not breastfeeding?
Definitely. And I think society is partly at fault. The WHO is partly at fault. UNICEF is partly at fault, because now when you go to a doctor's surgery, there are posters in there that say, give your baby the best start in life. Breastfeed.
Yeah, breast is
so
best.
If you're the mother who cannot breastfeed for one reason or another, or she doesn't want to breastfeed, she's going to sit in that doctor's surgery and she's going to look at that poster and she's going to say, I'm fucking failing as a mother. And how sad is that?
Do you see a link between postpartum depression and not being able to breastfeed? Or it's hard to judge, I guess?
It's hard to judge, and I would push it actually the other way around. And very often when we have someone who is absolutely miserable postpartum, trying to breastfeed, but it's not working, but we then work on making the decision to switch to an alternative method of feeding, sometimes there's like this cloud that just lifts.
Right, can be a
and
relief.
She can start to thrive.
Great, that's good. Yeah, that makes sense. It's the horse and the cart, and which comes first. Yeah. Do you think we pay enough attention or consider parents who conceive and have infertility issues? And how can we be more compassionate about that issue?
So I think when it comes to fertility issues, things are changing positively. There's a hashtag on Instagram, IVF baby. I see it in my feed all the time. So it's not as much of a taboo anymore as it used to be even just a few years ago. And I think that is partly because the infertility rate is going up and up and up and up. And more people are resorting to IVF or surrogacy to fulfill their dream to have a baby. So I think from what I can see, we're definitely in the right direction in terms of being compassionate.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. And there are alternatives, but those alternatives can cost money, can't they?
Definitely.
Well, I guess there's some countries that have free IVF for the first few tries.
Yeah, but not for the first few tries. And
it's not.
It's for the first few tries, but in many countries, it will only be covered for maybe 1 or 2 cycles.
And it can quite often be more than that you need to conceive.
IVF to this day, IVF and surrogacy is not accessible to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Finally, just to finish up, Sofie, what are your top tips for being an awesome parent?
Ooh, be true to who you are, stick to your values, and learn to love yourself. And don't overthink.
Yeah.
And trust your gut and trust your instinct and your reason, because we all have instinct, we all have a gut, and we all have reason.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for meeting with me today, Sofie. It's been an eye-opening and really fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Sofie, if people want to get in touch with you to find out more about the services that you offer, how can they get in touch?
My website is called urban-hatch.com, and the online antenatal course is on there, and so are my other services. I also have a blog that I very regularly update, and I'm always talking about breastfeeding and natural birth, cesarean sections, how to get dads involved, how to prepare them. I have a Facebook page as well, and an Instagram page that is always full of free content.
And are all those pages all called Urban Hatch?
Yeah, so the website is urban-hatch.com. Instagram is at urban_hatch. Facebook at Urban Hatch.
Brilliant. Sofie, thank you so much for spending time with me today and sharing all of your wisdom about pregnancy, birthing and motherhood and fatherhood. It's been amazing. It's been great to talk to you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I had a ball.
Yeah, it's
I love
great.
talking about this.
Yeah, you
So
clearly
thank you
are
for
so
having me.
knowledgeable. You're very welcome. Thank you for coming in. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.